like a very big ask. I'm like,
Yeah, exactly.
that's ambitious. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, he was saying to buy a new wire bag. Hey Zach, how are you?
Yeah, good mate. Sorry, I was just seeing that my sound was clipping into your sound, so I'm trying to fix that. Yeah, I'm good. I might have to go get some breakfast stuff because I only just woke up here. But no, I'm all good. How are you guys?
Not bad, not bad. It's funny. I'm in New Zealand, so it must be like 7 o'clock for you.
Yeah, 7:30. It's the weekend, so I
Yeah.
woke up and I saw all these messages on SV, and I'm like, oh yeah, that shit. Better get out of bed. But I haven't eaten. I haven't had coffee. I'm not a human yet.
It's cool. It's cool to have the two boys from down under together on the show.
You would.
Yeah, and then on the
Yeah, we're upside down, mate. That's the problem. We're on the other side.
oh god,
Uh,
nice to finally
Alright.
speak though. But yeah,
Yeah, man. It's good.
it's funny. One of my favorite pastimes is browsing the local classic fields for things I don't need. And it's like, oh, what if I buy this? It's like I don't need to buy. The thing with like secondhand audio gear, I feel that a lot of us are kind of thinking this is so cheap I should try it, but it's kind of like a lot of people I feel kind of like side grade. Um, that's
Oh
just me.
yeah. No,
But
people
like,
do side grade. That's a massive part of the hobby.
and there's nothing wrong with that. It's still just trying out new gear, seeing what you like more.
Hmm.
Um, but it's interesting. Something that's really been interesting to me personally is how the secondhand audio market has really skyrocketed in say the last 2-3 years, especially here in New Zealand. We originally say a 1990s Rotel Cambridge audio amp, pretty low end stuff would be going for 80-50 bucks, right? Now that kind of stuff is at 250, 300, and sometimes dealers are getting 400-500 for very entry level gear. Which is really interesting in some regards. It's definitely seeing that there's a new generation of people interested in audio.
Hmm.
Um, I do wonder what audio will be in say 20-30 years. Will there still be a recession in vintage audio gear? Um,
What will be classified as vintage? People are like, oh
yeah.
yeah, I've got this vintage, 2005 Sony Discman.
But the funniest thing is if you go on eBay or whatever right now, people are selling those as vintage. Late 90s, early 2000s gear as vintage. iPods are now
Uh,
considered vintage, which amuses me highly.
uh, like the iPod with the scroll wheel, that horrible thing. People are like,
Yeah.
it sounds so good. I can hear the warmth.
Oh god.
I can hear Steve Jobs' intention in this device.
That's
Well,
why I
I
buy
mean,
them.
in all fairness, it's audio to the masses. Um, but even then, I mean, I love the listings that make the crappiest bit of gear seem like it's the best thing. So classing low end gear as high end, that really amuses me. Um, it's just, oh god,
It's all relative, right? I mean, if it's better than what you have, it's better.
that's pretty fair. That is fair.
I like when my friends are like, "Oh man, I got these Samsung earbuds. I know you got good hi-fi stuff, man. You gotta really hear them." And I'm just like, "Yep, okay. I'm glad you're happy."
Yeah, if you're happy, that's all that matters. And that's another thing with audio that I think a lot of people kind of forget. If something works for the said person, that's great. Like you don't need to spend heaps of money on it. But when someone like actually hears good sound, it's like, damn. There's a really good story. I work in a company who have you guys heard of a company called Sound United before?
And you not know.
So they
Yeah.
they own Bowers and Wilkins, Polk Audio, Denon, Marantz, Class A, and a plethora of other brands. Well, I work for the New Zealand repair agents of them. And it's really funny. There was a story because we also do say just standard audio repair for people off the street. There was a story of my coworkers who aren't audiophiles, which is really funny because some of the gear they work on is really high end. Um, but there was a story of a pair of stacked headphones that came in, and they commonly speak about as the best thing these guys have heard, which is really, really interesting to me. And they had no idea what they were. And I told them recently, those are like really valuable, right? And they're really interesting. And it's like, wow, So I think I'm just waffling here, to be honest.
No, it's good. It's interesting.
With a lot of
I'm
older
listening.
tube gear, my main interest is in, say, older valve audio gear. So most of the stuff I like working on is 1950s, 1960s gear.
They'll
so
leak
leak-
stuff.
Yeah, my dad,
Whatever.
he recently restored his pair of leaks. He's leaked TL12 pluses, which were one of the leaked TL12.1s. Sorry, they were one of the first amplifiers to have 0.1 total harmonic distortion. So they're kind of an audio classic of history in that regard, and they sound really lively and fun. And I think you can even look on audio and tube gear in two ways. Either you like the colorization, or you want really low distortion, and therefore tube gear probably isn't for you. And I think the beauty of it is that it's different and unique. But it's really funny because I'll go home from work and I'll be working on a modern Marantz receiver or something absolutely awful, and then I'll be working on some old bit of tube hi-fi gear. It's nice to kind of change things up. But the thing with tube audio gear and how it really resurged was in the 1980s, when there was a large stock of war surplus, right? So companies like Audio Research, they started using valves like ECC88s, which were never originally designed for hi-fi audio, unlike say a 12AX7 was. Essentially because there was such a good surplus of them and they were extraordinarily cheap. Now a lot of these valves are very expensive, which is one of the funniest things. But and then you've got brands like, I've forgotten now. There was a number of hi-fi companies that popped up in the late 80s and 90s, kind of researching tube gear. There was a massive DIY resurgence in the late 70s, early 80s in Japan. And then with Asia being Asia, the Chinese market started copying a lot of stuff. Which is quite interesting. So that's where you got stuff like Audio Space, a number of Chinese audio brands. And there's one reason that I will never ever recommend Chinese audio gear from the 90s to people. Mainly valve stuff. I've heard stories of some good friends of mine who are audio technicians here locally, who have experienced some of the weirdest and most bizarre faults of Chinese amplifiers. Now, I have nothing against the build quality of modern Chinese gear. In fact, some of it's extraordinarily good. But the main things you're paying for in tube amp is the transformers. That's where the main money is, right?
Yeah.
So if you're paying $800 for a modern production tube amp, there's transformers, there's sockets, there's passive components like capacitors, resistors, and most of those are frankly quite cheap. But the main thing where your sound is coming from and where you get the most colorization and the exciting part happens is at the transformers.
100%.
The thing is, if you're getting into tube audio gear and you want a tube amp, it's not a bad option. But the reliability in some of the design flaws can just be too much of an oversight, and it's just not worth it. I've heard of cases of a good friend of mine. He was demoing some amplifiers in the late 90s, and the first one started brand new out of the box, started smoking up, and he invited a bunch of people around to try and sell these two. The second one started a small fire, and by the third one, everyone had left, which was quite amusing. And it's some of them just weren't very good quality. And then there's Counterfeit Parts, which is a mixed bag. You'll have, have you ever seen the meme of Russian dolls? But think of that with capacitors.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, but you get stuff like that. And really, I mean, the thing with Chinese tube amps, older ones especially, is the quality control was not good. And it can be a big gamble. The transformer quality control wasn't good either. Now, I'm by no means a measurement file, someone who really cares about specs. I genuinely don't. But the one thing that kind of matters in a tube are the specs of the transformers. So if you look at, say, Swota, Landau, Tamura, all of those are really good measuring transformers that a lot of people really love. Um, and in that case, specs do matter more so for transformers because it takes a lot more effort and quality to actually make a good measuring transformer, which in result gets the most out of the valves. Um, so that's an interesting thing, I suppose. So what are the topics for today?
Yeah, but before we get into the topics, I mean, you and Gaz are new to the show. You haven't been on before, so why don't we start off with some introductions? I've already started recording, so we've already been broadcasting. So a lot of that great information's already broadcasted. Yeah, Gaz, why don't we start with you? You want to tell us a bit about yourself and your kind of journey in hi-fi and that kind of thing?
All right, sure.
Go-
I think
go
I've
ahead.
been in. Yeah, sorry, I was just coughing. I think I've been in the hobby maybe 3 years. Really delved deep after a pair of my headphones broke, but I've always been into live sound. I've been with bands. There's a huge music scene. All my friends in high school played live. It was, that was the sound I knew, but you know, uh, after college, we all kind of moved away, so kind of got back into headphones, and I used a pair of Grados. Let's see, and kind of progressing now into where I am. I went on Super Best Audio Friends, and I met a lot of really cool people, especially Cena. I know a lot of people don't think he's that cool, but I think he's pretty freaking cool. Nicest guy ever. Lend me like near unobtainable gear all the time, and it kind of changed my whole perspective of what I think sounds good. I've been to stores, I've been to a few shows, but the sound I got out of that really, really changed how I feel and what I'm looking after in gear, and that kind of leads me to where I am right now. We started like a little thing, and I kind of just tried to gather all the knowledge I could of what he's read, some of his experiences, my experiences, and I'm just trying to share that with people.
Awesome. Sounds good. So welcome to the show. And then Bruno, do you want to give us a kind of intro to you and how you got involved in hi-fi and that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. So it started really when I was quite young. Originally, mainly kind of came off my father. He was originally he's into guitar stuff and started building his own guitar amplifiers using valves. And then it went to the point where he was buying old valve radios for parts and building amplifiers into them. And he met a guy who used to be a technician, and he was in his 1990s. From that, went to the local radio club, and one of the things he bought was this like an old radiogram, right? And there was stereo, and I really liked the idea of having an amplifier. I was quite young at the time, and I thought, well, could we, as a project, me and him, we tried to get it working. Anyway, it turned out the transformers were burnt out on it. My dad didn't know, but he took it to an audio technician who he knew from the radio club. Really, really kind guy. And essentially, he kind of introduced me and my father to audio, and hi-fi and stuff. I look at audio in a very interesting way, I suppose. I like things that are different and unusual. For some reason, I can't just keep the same thing for say a few weeks. I very, very quickly buy and sell gear, but purely for experimental stuff. I mainly build valve amplifiers, point to point from scratch, so that's mostly where my knowledge comes from.
Nice.
But yeah, I've been doing this kind of thing for around 5 years now. Yeah, that's essentially me.
Nice. That's awesome. And then before we get into the topics, I haven't heard much from Zach. So Zach, just do you want to tell us about kind of how you're doing and anything new from your side of the world and your system, that kind of thing?
Nah, I'm just a regular guy who comes on this channel. I've had a lot of new rectifiers I've been playing with. I bought, how sometimes you buy like a pile of tubes off eBay and then you get sent like an amazing stack of stuff? That kind of happened where I thought I bought some junk and got some great stuff. So I've sent it over. I got sent from like South Africa to somewhere else, the Netherlands, and to Australia. and then I've sent some of it back to my friends over in the States now, and now they're testing it. So I don't know, just like I'm just like following my friends' progress and sharing tubes and like doing the audio sharing thing where you kind of you experience something and you want other people to do it and you have access, so you're like, here, try this, see what you think, tell me what you think, how does it go in your system? Because I'm starting to realize that it's so system dependent that we sometimes say this is this, but really it's only like that in that very specific circumstance. In another circumstance it might sound completely different. So I don't know, that's kind of boggling my mind, but apart from that, all's good on my end.
Are these tubes? Did you say tubes that you got, or what did you get?
Tube rectifiers. So a bunch of us have these, tube amps where the power supply's got rectifiers in it, and you wouldn't think that has much. You wouldn't think that has a great deal of impact on the sound, but in the couple of the amps that we're using that were built by Craig Althers, it seems that changing the rectifiers is more important than the power tubes. Which I riddle me that. Bruno can probably shine some light on that.
The thing with rectifiers now, I don't know if a lot of tubes you've bought off eBay are new in box, or if they're secondhand valves that aren't in boxes. But
no, they're vintage 1930s, 40s stuff in box, never used.
I see, interesting. So if they're different models, especially, they've got more different higher specs or different higher ratings. To put it in quite simple terms. Higher ratings, of course, will come with, to some, a significant difference in sound, since it gives the amplifier more power, more kind of edge, you could say. Now, I'm very, very bad with describing soundstage, so I will try and prevent myself from doing so, since I'll probably just hurt you all. But the thing with old rectifiers and such is that, in my opinion, you can either buy a modern rectifier and it will have the best, it will be quite, strong, and it shouldn't have been used, and it's going to be quite accurate. But there's a real benefit of playing around with different rectifiers and seeing, especially sometimes even used rectifiers, you'll definitely get more of a difference, because you can, how most power supplies on the tube amp work, you've got your secondary is your power transformer, technically 2 diodes, or a rectifier, and then there's some capacitors, some resistors for filtering. Very simple stuff. That's how most tube amps do it normally. You will find typically there's far more of a you'll find there's you will find there's the tubes have been constructed differently, of course, and will have different effects. I mean, it all goes hand in hand. And it's definitely worth buying up, say, a lot of tubes on eBay just to have fun with. Brands and ages do have some impact because of how they've been manufactured. I don't like to say nothing's best or worst, because everyone likes different gear. Output tubes, I'm kind of in the belief where, say, EL84s, the old things, EL84s, 34s, standard stuff like that, you'll have much more of a difference if you change input tubes. Or if you change out the output tubes to completely different types. Since most of your coloration is happening either at the preamp, then to the power amp, then mainly it's either at the preamp stage or the output stage. That's where most of your coloration is happening. So that's why some people like OTL, since it can be less colored, and it's more technically pure in some regards. The tubes that Executor has just sent me a picture of look to be almost TV related. You can see they're top caps, and they're kind of what we call a compatron.
Alright.
But yeah, I mean,
Fair enough. I appreciate it. So, yeah, for the topics today, I think that none of us have gone to CanJam, have we? The CanJam New York? No. So
No.
So let's skip over that, because nobody like Makaya's not here and that kind of thing. So we'll skip that. And I guess the trade show discussion, we'll just skip that. Let's get into EQ. So first of all, do you guys use EQ? And if so, is it hardware or software EQ? And what are some of the downsides of EQ that you guys have found?
I can go first, I guess.
Go ahead.
don't like EQ out of principle, but if it's kind of like a low end system, I'll probably just use it. I mean, I can't hear it in a low end system, but in a higher end system, I would like to have the perception of greater purity in the signal path, even if it is digital. Personally.
Yeah, I'm pretty much 100% with Gaz on that one. I don't like to use it if I can help it. I don't like to do any sort of DSP if I can help it. I think it's usually at the cost of a bigger compromise to do it. You might fix one problem, but you seem to cause many other smaller problems as well. So I don't know. It's just never been something that I've implemented in a medium or a high end system. But he's right. Like sometimes with like really cheap stuff, it can be great to sort of fix a massive glaring problem, you know, tune the bass up a little bit, make it a little bit tighter. But apart from that, no, I don't really mess with EQ.
Like a Bluetooth IEM. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, Bruno. But
That's
like a
fine.
Bluetooth IEM, like AirPods Pro or the Samsung Buds, like all those use DSP. The Sony stuff, it's all DSP, and it's already Bluetooth, so why not? That's how I feel about it.
I mean, the thing with DSP and EQ is that it can be good for some cases. Now, I personally listen to a lot of older electronic music, which is frankly very poorly mastered for a lot of it, and I kind of like the fact that it basically sounds like shit. Um, so the thing is, I use EQ a lot when making music, and if I need to say, if I'm listening to a very poorly transferred or dubbed bit of music, it can be very handy. Um, but I personally like very flat, neutral sound, but that's just me. It's a very much a personal kind of thing, I suppose. And I mean, as you said, anything using a wireless interface, of course, will have DSP of some way or another, which is just standard. And then you've got Bluetooth headphones and such, of course, like that. And that, of course, that adds another layer of decoding, which is a completely other mixed bag.
Yeah, I mean, if it's all digital signal processing, I mean, that's just part of it.
Yeah, of course, but it does also add to it. So you can either just go with the flow of it, or just not want to use it at all. Yeah, it really goes hand in hand, I suppose.
Yeah, personally, I'm really interested in trying out high-end hearing aids just to know what they sound like. I mean,
Fair
some
enough.
signal processing there, so.
Yeah, it's interesting what the future of DSP and that kind of thing will be, and if we start to gravitate towards that, and eventually a time where IEMs can replicate like massive expensive speakers in a perfect room, something like that. If that will ever happen, I don't know, but that's something that I think perhaps may happen, and that'll be interesting if it does. So the next thing is about variations in hardware. So this is a kind of common kind of I guess you could say meme, where you have a certain piece of gear and there's a variation of that gear in the sense that it's not a announced variation. So for example, the HD650, and then there's the more vintage or older versions like the Black Silk version. The LCD4 is another classic one where they call it the audeze lottery, where you have to so many LCD4s have kind of different sounds, and that may or may not be bound by a certain time frame, or there might be like something on the device that may kind of signal that it's from that batch or whatever it is. So my question is have you guys experienced that at all? Have you experienced variations of the same piece of gear, and have you found that a certain variant or older variant is better than the newer variant?
I have found in the past that different, well, mainly on the tube gear, there's always going to be some slight differences if the gear has not been restored, because, well, passive components, of course, have a tolerance and will range and can, of course, fail over time and increase and decrease in value. I haven't tried enough modern gear really to have a good enough understanding, but from working on gear, you might see if there's been a production change. There will, of course, be some slight changes into an audible sound. Now we're heading into the year silicon shortage, so with makers having to change DAC chips and such varieties of that, I think it will be a lot more prominent in the future. But mainly with older unrestored gear, it's if something's thing with like if you go on online reviews, especially vintage gear, it's kind of a mixed bag if someone's negative about it. Because what if it hasn't been worked on and their unit's technically got aging parts? Um, the audeze one is something I can't talk about personally, but it definitely is interesting. I know they've had poor quality control in the past, and that obviously would have quite a big impact. I don't know about the others here.
Another one
Uh,
you commonly hear about is like low serial number HD 800, like that kind of thing. I haven't experienced that obviously, but yeah, Gas, sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the black silks versus other HD 600s. And there's a difference, but I think there's really a difference in almost everything. How much you want to consider it to be true is really up to you. But an easy example would be tubes of the same type. I mean, they almost all sound different. There's no real tube that kind of sounds just like it. Maybe some GE made tube because they had some pretty high quality stuff back in the day. But I'll say also I've heard the HD 800 and low serial number. I kind of started that meme. If you look on Headfiles, the first post on the buy section to post about that. I did it for fun, and apologies to anyone that wanted to buy one of those, but yeah, it's my fault. Yeah, I hear a difference. I think it's all right, but I still wouldn't buy the headphone personally.
With tubes and such, definitely very prominent with different era of manufacturing, and say some brands will might have changed their glass molding, um, their internal construction and such, and that will of course have quite a noticeable effect when you've got different styles of getter and such. And that all is, as Gaz was saying, is very prominent. It's not always safe to judge. Oh, let's say an RCA black plate, or it's not going to be always the exact same because those tubes have been made for a very long time. They might have been in production for 15, 20 years by the same company, but over those 15, 20 years, they might have improved or changed construction techniques. That definitely is very prominent in sound. Comparing, if you want to be really precise, comparing if you want to get another tube, you look for the date code, and that way you can be certain. The printing can also be a decent way of it, unless it's an OEM tube using something else than rebadged or whatever. Printing on the valve itself and finding some kind of date code will help a lot to get something that's near equivalent to what you've already got.
Yeah, I was always told get the date codes as close as possible and try to get the factory the same and stay within a certain range. Usually older is better for some tube types.
I mean, it all really depends, especially with quality control and that and manufacturing. But that's the biggest things you'll find. I don't really like to think no tube is better than the other in that case. And it just really depends on the valve.
Yeah, like I've tried some small signal tubes and I found they can all vary drastically, and some tubes have like a strange, slightly different or smoothing or maybe glassy effect on transients, and I like that, and I'm trying to find those tubes again. But it's just finding the one for you. I think is the most important, even though there is variances.
Yeah, for sure. I've always thought of making an amplifier or preamp with a large amount of sockets with selectable voltage loading and such, where I could change out valves and see how much of a noticeable difference there is. Because say over a time of a few days or a few months of trying different valves, and I mean, hey, a lot of people here would sell off tubes and buy something else. It's kind of hard to base an accurate representation off that. To be honest with yourself, and you're kind of thinking of making up ways to convince yourself that said thing is better or worse. But I think definitely having some kind of side-by-side comparison with valves is definitely very useful.
I guess there's sort of problems with that though, because look at an amplifier, like a modern amplifier that does something similar to what you're talking about. There's the Woo WA234, which is a monoblock tube amp for basically headphones. But it allows you to select 2A3, 300B, or 45. The problem is it has a single transformer that wasn't really selected for any of those tube types, and then they allow you to sort of like switch between the tubes with a key, But the problem is because they don't kind of build, the amp around that one tube type. Like, if you're building a 2A3, you can pick certain transformers that kind of marry better with the 2A3 tube style. Or if you're going for a 45, which is a more exotic sound, there are certain transformers that sound better with that. But I find that when you've got like 3 different tube types in one transformer, you never really hear those tubes in their optimal sort of condition. You can't always hear them in slightly compromised condition. So I don't know if that's possible to just like change power tubes with one amp. You'd have to like be able to hot swap the transformers as well, I reckon, to do it fairly.
Well, here's the thing. The more so thing about hot swapping power tubes is that say they're all the normal circuit is all very similar, and you can get away with putting KT88s in place of an EL34. If you say have a switch to lower voltage and be more precise, so you can adjust biasing, it's accurate enough. Now, if you wanted to be really pedantic and special, what you could do is say have a wee microcontroller switching, say, 8 relays to also select component values optimized for that said tube. Now, the 45 and 2A free were use the same heater voltage if I recall correctly, and they're very similar. The only thing with the 2A free is it's slightly higher output by about 1 watt. There's quite funny, if you look at some old radios, it's not uncommon to see a 2A free in place of a 45, vice versa, because they will run, and the transformers are designed for the same kind of thing. Although I do respect what you're saying in there, it is true, you want to make sure it is optimal. If you say put a 12AT7 in place of a 12AX7, vice versa, there will be a very noticeable difference, and sometimes it's not very optimal for the circuit. And if you're then saying basing 1287 and thinking it's 1280, and then thinking it's bad or vice versa, that can kind of confuse people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think probably the most successful tube amp like that would probably be something from Glenn OTL. I mean, but he has no transformer, right? So that's kind of how he tries to get away with it.
I mean, OTL is a completely different story. I mean, it's a different kind of sound. I am personally someone who likes alpha transformer amps. I'm not a big fan of OTL stuff, but that's just me. I like more traditional sounding push-pull stuff, but I do see the appeal and attraction in single-ended stuff. One of the best systems I heard was there's a brand called Almaro, and they made this really cute EL84 amp, which used single-ended, had a single driver, 112AX7, and it was powering a pair of. If you guys ever seen the Fostech Jericho horns?
I think so. I think I have.
Yeah.
Go on.
It was powering with like 2-meter tall transmission line horns using these like 4.5-inch drivers. Could have been the FE103s, and it was absolutely mind-boggling. You could stand 10 meters away from it and you could still hear it really loud. And that's something really special about tube gear and efficiency, I feel. You can really use really low power amps and get amazing results.
Yeah. Go ahead, guess.
Oh, I mean, I'm trying to explore the high efficiency, low power, as minimal as a crossover as possible. Personally, I think the battle for more and more watts is just a symptom of the crossover designs in most modern speakers. Personally,
yeah,
I'm
interested. I'm interested in hearing crossoverless speakers, just to hear kind of what that sound is like. I came across those Omega speakers that are just single driver full range, and I wouldn't mind hearing that. And now that I'm kind of getting more into tubes, something like that's very sensitive, and then putting an OTL amp or some kind of tube power amp on that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, like the lower crossover kind of speakers, like the Jericho horn style. I think that probably gets you a bit closer to the HD 650 that you really enjoy on the crack.
Yep.
Obviously, full range speakers have flaws themselves, but with those flaws, you get some pros too.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so speaking of speakers, let's talk a bit about panel speakers, things like Magnapans and that kind of thing. We've already kind of got into that a little bit. But what are your thoughts? Have you guys heard any panel speakers that you liked, or what are your thoughts about, or do you dislike them? What are your thoughts on panel type speakers? Any thoughts? Anybody? Like Magnapans, things like that?
I will
From what
say. Oh, go on.
from what I've heard, they're great. From what I've heard online and from friends, they're great things, but they consume a lot of power. So they're a bit like the Battle of Watts. So they're insanely inefficient, but they're very different and unique. I'd love to hear a pair of Magnapans, but in New Zealand, there's not many dealers locally to me. In fact, there's no dealers locally in my town. Of surprisingly 400,000 people and 8 audio shops, there's someone doesn't sell Magnapans, which surprises me. Um, I mean, then there's Martin Logan's, which are completely different again when they've got a main. They're kind of a hybrid in some ways, I suppose. But they are. I'd love to try stacks, but that's a different thing again.
I have very limited experience, but from what I've heard, they all kind of sound a little compressed. And if they're not 20 feet tall, I mean, I probably wouldn't want them. But also, if they're 20 feet tall, I couldn't own them.
Yeah, I mean, they've definitely got their flaws and pros, of course. And the size is one of those things that really is a hard selling point for some people. And I mean, it goes to why I think headphones are so popular. If you live around people or in a small space, it's really not going to be convenient to have 20-foot tall flat panel speakers in your living room.
Did you guys come across the PS Audio speakers that they just released? They started doing some installs, and they have some videos about their Fr30 speakers. So it's basically it's not a panel speaker, but they use I think it's a ribbon mid-range and tweeter, and they have the mid-range oriented at the top, the tweeter below. They have 4, I think, aluminum woofers. And then another 4 passive radiators, like 2 on each side of each tower, essentially. So it's an interesting design. Did you guys take a look at the videos on that, or have you seen pictures of it?
Yeah, I've seen some of the videos and some of the development that went into it, but it's not for me. Just as I stated before, the crossover design and the power requirements.
And everything I've heard from Paul so far has been pretty average. I don't like his DACs. I don't like his amps. So if this is to his tuning, I doubt I'm gonna like his speaker. But look, I'm open to try anything. Maybe he's pulled off some sort of miracle, but it'll be a long time before I have the opportunity to hear this in Australia.
I must say, I very much disagree with some of Paul's opinions, more so especially on his way on tube saying that, no, tube out stages aren't the way, you must have a tube line stage, which absolutely infuriates me because most of your colorization is coming from the output stage. That just really infuriates me. But on topic of his speakers, they look really interesting. I think one of the things we haven't been seeing in modern speaker design is that it's all the same. If you go into a shop, all these for the last 20 years, most speakers look very similar to each other. And they look great. They look also heavy and massive and probably consume a shit ton of power, but they look great.
They kind of remind me of the keys when I look at them a little bit. Like the key audio stuff. I know they're not as like modular and stuff, but it's just that sort of style, this like futuristic looking box thing.
Yeah, they're nicely designed, but they are again maybe in the same ballpark as flat panel speakers. They consume a lot of power, they're massive, and they're probably not going to appeal to all people, and just based on living spaces. One thing that would be interesting is if they do the same kind of concept and a small mid-bookshelf type of speaker. That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that's planned, but I think there's like 2 other speakers planned, like smaller ones. But how much power would that one take? Like a bookshelf, you aren't known for low power requirements, but if it is, maybe it might be interesting.
Yeah, I don't expect to see Paul doing any high efficiency stuff anytime soon. It would be interesting if something does come about that. Then, what about PS Audio headphones? That would be something interesting.
I'd imagine they look a lot like audezes.
And speaking of kind of new gear, might as well get into a big announcement for headphones is a new ZMF headphone for people who haven't heard, called the Atrium. So I don't know if you guys have looked at this at all or come across Tyler's Eclectic has a pair and he's heard it and he's done kind of like a impression / review video on it. But it's quite interesting, quite this kind of backwave damping system that he's come up with, and apparently this is the most kind of open, kind of fastest sounding ZMF headphone. Have you guys seen anything related to this?
I saw a few of the photos, the black and white baffle photo. It looks pretty interesting. I suspected he's just moving away from dampening the cup and now instead dampening the driver directly instead.
Man, that's I'm here by the way now.
Hey Juan, welcome.
Yeah, I'm on the way to a vaccination appointment. But anyways, I saw a picture of it right before it was announced. Viewer got a hold of it. But I'm still not fully clear on what the special damping system is. It looks nice though.
It has a good name.
I mean, they're moving into a little bit more of a. I think it's like an oval cup or something like that. Might be nice, ergonomic. Well, yeah, it looks interesting.
All right. Okay, fair enough.
In regards to the panel speakers, sorry, going back to that. I have experience with precisely one, and it was at the show in Long Beach. It was kind of the centerpiece of the show, I guess. It was this massive set of panels taking up an entire wall, basically. It was pretty nice. But the best thing they had there.
But how big was the room? And how big were the speakers?
It was like I don't remember exactly how big they were. At least like, I don't know, 5-6 feet tall. Maybe taller. Like they were big. They were a good amount taller than myself actually. So probably 6 to 8 feet maybe. And the room itself, it was I don't know any of these dimensions, but yeah, the room itself was like this sort of long rectangular sort of hall, I guess. Wasn't too big, but it was like the panel speakers were taking up a good portion of the one side of the room, but worked out pretty nicely compared to the other setups there.
What's the go with some of these like Martin Logans and stuff having such a small sweet spot? You'd think the off-axis performance would be really good, but you know, they say when you're listening to Martin Logans, and I've had this experience when I listen to the Martin Logans, is there's about a 30-centimeter window, like a foot window in the middle of the room exactly, where if your head goes outside of that, things start to sound wacky. And I was like, how is this possible? Like, I thought, you know, the off-axis performance would be amazing with this sort of design, but yeah, seems like that was it's a known thing with Martin Logans, is that the sweet spot is tiny. Nope.
Lana has joined us. Hey, Lana, how's it going?
Hello, I'm good. How are you all?
Good. We're talking about panel speakers, and I know you heard, I think, Lana, the Sound Labs. Was it the Sound Labs Electrostats, or which one did you hear?
Yeah, they were 9-foot-tall Sound Labs Electrostats. I forget which model. I just know that they were worth a crap ton, and he got them. Some guy unloaded them for like 14,000. Like a super rare, like refurbished and everything set, and my friend Tom pounced on it, and he yeah, that's what he listens to.
Are those E-stats?
They are E-stats, yes.
How did you like them?
So he was using Iggy, and I think he was using, I don't know what his amp was because it was sort of hidden behind a bunch of stuff, but with Iggy, I mean, super polite with female vocals or vocals of anything. I think the Iggy being in the chain made them a bit too soft for my liking, because the first time I heard it, I remember I remember telling my friends, "Oh, this seems kind of boring." But then some guy came over with the Bricasti M21, and suddenly they had all this slam and depth, and they hit like a truck, and I was like, wow, these panel speakers really just, that you can mold them, I guess, with a different amplification or sources, and I was very impressed with them. The sound just felt so huge, probably because I mean, they were massive. They were huge panel speakers. Um and yeah, the directionality on them was insane. Like, you could just hear the imaging from left and right, feel like you were sitting in a concert hall, and things were just very holographic and wide. Of course, they were very huge. They were the biggest panel speakers I've ever heard. It was quite nice. I'm gonna hear them again in a few weeks, and I'm thinking of doing a more detailed review and more critical listening, because usually it was just us messing about and having fun rather than very critically like assessing them.
Cool. Sounds cool. Let's get into a little bit more tube discussion. And I mean, the next topic was about kind of tubes versus solid state. But Alana, why don't you tell us about you got a new purchase? You picked up something. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I got the Felix Euphoria. Reason I got this was because I blind purchased a Felix Espressivo MK2. And I really liked it, but I felt that it could, people just kept saying, oh, the Euphoria is this huge step up, so I'm letting it burn in now. I'm more impressed with it every day. It has a very sort of neutral, it definitely sounds more like quote tubey than my LTA Z10. More three-dimensional and holographic. You get that sort of sense of the sound. I don't know how to explain it. Like, the sound is has a lot of depth, and the sound stage is very like round. And I do think that what people say about the stock tubes potentially needing to be rolled and replaced is true, because I just feel like I could get more use out of them, like proper use, if I upgraded them to better tubes. But so far I'm really enjoying them. Um, by no means is it like an overly gooey or warm. I don't know, maybe that might be what bottlehead crack is, at least that's what people tell me. But this is definitely more towards neutrality, but it has this really nice lushness, thickness, this nice low end. It has a density to it. Even though there's no output transformer, I've heard tube amps with output transformers, and it has a similar sort of lushness and weight to it, and it's very pleasing, honestly. Like, at times, euphoric, even. Uh, So yeah, I'm enjoying it. I can tell the tubes aren't fully burned in yet. It took me about a week to fully appreciate my old amp by Felix. I liked it from the box, but it definitely um didn't sound burned in until like the 50-hour mark. I think I'm at hour 16 on this, so it just keeps getting better and better. I'm sure I'll have more to say about it when it completely opens up and reaches its true potential.
Awesome. Sounds like a great amp. What other experiences do you guys have with tubes in general? Do you have experiences you want to share where, like, maybe the first time you heard good tubes, or yeah? And then the other question, kind of after that, would be: has there ever been a time where you heard a solid state amp that has really impressed you and made you kind of question whether you even need to bother with any kind of tube gear?
I once heard an amplifier made by a French company called Audio Analyse, which is a really interesting amp. It's a dual mono Class A amplifier. I think it could be A60. I'll try and find it for you guys. But it's an all Class A design, Class A output stage of around about 100 watts per channel. Really lovely design, and they just started remaking it. Now, this amplifier had a very refined sound compared to most solid state amps I found. It was very tasteful in its way of presentation. And it's just one of those things I'd love to see again. It's unfortunate being in New Zealand, a lot of the stuff is very, very rare here. But Class A solid state stuff is something that is very interesting.
Yeah, Nelson Pass always says that with his amps, he's trying to go for some of that kind of some of the benefits of many tube amps, however you classify that. He's trying to capture those in his solid state amps, right? Like he says a tube amp sound without the hassle. That's kind of something that he says. Whether it's true or not is a different story, obviously. But anybody else with want to share their experience with tubes? Zach, of course, you have probably one of the most legendary tube head amps there is. Any kind of stories about that, or your experiences getting into tubes?
Look, I blind bought the studio years ago. I just followed the story, and I think I got a bit invested in it and a bit romantic about it, hearing, Moth Audio, and then I'd always loved Moth Audio as a company, and then I saw that Craig was doing this one-off crazy, cost no object, the ultimate amp that he could basically put together before he retired, and I was just like, oh man, it's hard to say no when you're that invested and that curious about something. So I was on a journey at the time, trying to get the most I could out of headphones, because I was living in an apartment, and I tried a lot of solid states and I tried a lot of gear. And pretty much it all ended when the amp came. I still hear stuff to review it and stuff, but no solid state amp has really ever, headphone amp has ever made me go, oh yeah, I've wasted my time and money. I need to go and just sell this and stick with this. It's always been, there's been moments when I turn on the studio and I'm reminded why I love the single-ended triode sound so much. And sometimes we get used to it, if you listen to it every single day, and you kind of start taking it for granted. But a few times it's I've had issues, I think something broke on it and I had to send it to the States, and then I thought, oh, maybe I'll sell it, and then as soon as it came back, I was like, oh god, I'm glad I didn't sell it. So it's my experience has just been pretty good with tube amps. The tube amps I have, there's quite a lot of junk on the market though. A lot of tube amps are just in it for heavy coloration, heavy distortion, big THD, and that's not what I'm about. I kind of want the benefits of the tube amp being the sparkle and the highs, and a little bit of bloom and a little bit of wetness sometimes, but most of the time it's I kind of want it to be as accurate as the best solid state, but without the drawbacks of sounding like solid state, sounding almost digital in certain ways. But I don't know, there are some great solid state amps that have come out recently, people talking a lot about Coda and stuff like that. So there's definitely stuff I haven't heard that's being hyped that I'd like to hear. But I tried to translate the tube thing to high efficiency, and then I couldn't find high efficiency speakers that met the compromises I was willing to accept. There was just too many big compromises with a lot of the horn systems, and some of them were my fault. Some of them were, this horn is fantastic in a room that's like a amphitheater, but if you've got a normal household room, it's just not gonna roll. They need a certain amount of space to sound correct. So anyway, solid state can be good, but most of the time I think that good tube beats solid state for me, especially with headphones. But for speakers, you know, limited watts and high efficiency speakers, and I know Gaz and Bruno are going to come after me with the steak, but there's just too many compromises for me. And I tried, man, I really tried, and I would love to be wrong, you know, and I'd love to have a product come out that really changes my opinion. But the Aries Surratt actually came quite close. Actually, hearing that speaker, I was like, oh, maybe there is hope. But I mean, the crossover and stuff on that speaker, you know, none of the drivers are in house. You're paying a lot of money for, you know, some very basic drivers and some pretty fancy acrylic. But it was probably the least compromised horn I'd actually heard in a long time. So yeah. Anyway.
I definitely think, Zeke, you're quite right. I'm not really for. I'm not going to say full range is the best thing ever. It's really not. I kind of find the imperfections of some older tube gear rather lively and fun. But that's just me. Full range drivers are by no means the way to go, but they are different and enjoyable in their own way. Which is what the beauty of them is, and especially that some of them can be had for very reasonable money. Tube amps on speakers is a completely different thing in some regards to headphones. The amplifier is different. A lot of the times the tubes, the outputs are completely different. I think the hot spot, you know, the best spot kind of for tube power amps speakers is around the 20 to 50 watt range. That's enough to really drive most speakers that you'd want to play with. Okay, apart from stuff like Make Your Pants, but even then, it's pretty fun. And they're unique in their own way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You know, of course, yeah. Like I said, I don't think I would go full range, but I think maybe Smod would, because what he's telling me about the HD 650, and he kind of just wants that in a speaker, right? But like he's really in love with this HD 650 right now, so you know we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, low power stuff, it's near impossible to power anything with. So I'd probably go with a push-pull EL 34 amp personally. But it would be vintage, and exactly like Exec said, like a new product that's high efficiency, that's good. I don't think it exists personally, and I think you got to go vintage. It's the only way, in my opinion.
So you guys are not on the Clips train?
I don't know. I don't think.
I am.
Oh yeah, Lana is. Yeah. So what do you think about your Clip speakers, Lana? Tell us about the Clip sound.
See, the Clip sound, when I heard it at a dealer, I heard it with the Prima Luna amp and DAC. The EL34s gave it a very romantic, lush, weighty sound, and then like I took them home and I stuck them on my linear tube audio tube amp, which is I don't want to say it sounds solid state. It sounds like a hybrid, even though it's not a hybrid. And I've sort of had this crisis because I'm like, wow, this isn't the same sort of lush, romantic sound that I heard at the dealer. I think more of the speakers shines through on my chain, and I adore horns, truly. I do feel that a lot of, even my dealers said, oh, you'll want to get a nice tube amp to soften out the edges and get the highs more tamed, and I can definitely see that it's a bit on the bright side, but I mean, I just love horns for like jazz, rock, female vocals, blues, all that. But because I heard them on a chain at the store that made them sound so romantic and lush, I just can't get it out of my head that I want to try finding some sort of either vintage or new production EL34 tube amp, because it was just very pleasing. I know some people in Sonic Vision say that, those amps that the dealers throw on them, either Macintosh or Prima Luna, will sort of make them sound more lo-fi, as in, you won't get, the most exact, the most precise, the cleanest, transparent sound that you can, but I honestly think that's why people like those amps so much that dealers throw on everything, because it sort of makes the sound more pleasing, and I definitely do feel the call for a nice EL34 tube amp. I do like my speakers as is. People tell me that I should try tube rolling my Z10 first and seeing if I can play around with that. Um, so yeah, no, I'm a huge Klipsch fan. I just haven't found like the right chain that I absolutely love with them, but I've heard them on chains that sounded fantastic.
Cool. And we're joined by Void, and this is, I think, Bruno's friend. So do you have any thoughts on kind of high sensitivity speakers and using tube gear to power them, and the sound you can get out of them, horns, etc.? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I heard you guys were talking about vintage EL34s, and that kind of caught my interest. When it comes to high efficiency speakers, there's a couple routes you can go with tubes. Like, if you're going to go with high power KT88s or something like that, like 6550s, I don't think they mesh as well with like a Klipsch or like a vintage Altec or something to that effect. But there are some things like a Dynaco Stereo 70 is really, like, it's such an excellent entry point because they're not horribly expensive. They're EL34 based, and they're really soft in the high end. So because of that, they work really well with older horn speakers. They mesh really well with them. I played around with the Altec A7 for about 3 years and trying out different amplification on that, and I ended up settling on a EL84 based Magnavox amplifier of all things, because it just worked compared to various solid state pieces that I had here. So when it comes to tubes and high efficiency stuff, you really are just kind of looking for, if you want to call it lo-fi or veiled or overly warm or whatever term you want to use, that's the kind of stuff you're kind of looking for with like a really high efficiency speaker, because generally speaking they can be pretty aggressive on the high end, especially like old 70s Klipsch or old Altec or any of that kind of stuff. So because otherwise, if you take like a super transparent, super clean solid state amp and you put it on those things, it could be pretty dang unpleasant. So you just kind of want to work with that, I guess. As for modern amps, when it comes to that, like modern tube amps, I'm not as experienced because I'm a technician by trade, so I work on mostly old stuff, but that's just kind of where I sit in that regard.
Yeah, I can definitely attest that my Klipsches, even though they're on a tube amp, the tube amp, it takes EL84s, it's very linear, it was designed to be very linear. I get like this kiss of warmth when I listen to my speakers, but it definitely is not an amp that's going to completely smear over the speaker's signature and what the speaker is known for. It lets the speaker shine. So there have definitely been times I've been listening to it and I thought, oh wow, it's bright in the highs. I really wish that I had a different amp to try here, like maybe an EL34, which is what I heard it with, to sort of tone it down and tame it. But that's not to say I don't appreciate my speakers. I really like them a lot. I also have a Klipsch Forte 2 that was my dad's, and he gave it to me. And I tried my amp on it as well, and I don't know, like I really like my setup, but I want to play around with more tubes because I just want to find that sort of Goldilocks sound again where, you know, enough of the speakers come through to where I'm not just masking the speaker, but I just want those highs just a bit more tame and non-fatiguing, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
So this is something I've been thinking about too, kind of getting a sense of what people want from their sound and what should it sound like. You have some people that are, you know, purists in the sense that they want exactly what is recorded, you know, what the artist's intent is. Then you're other people who want some, you know, some emphasis somewhere in the frequency response, and maybe some bloom or maybe something to make it more exciting. So the first question would be, what is your sound? What is the sound that you personally like? How would you describe the sound that you like? And then the other question I have is that, have you ever thought of, like, let's say there's two types of sounds you like. You know, sometimes you're in for, you really like a very fast, neutral, accurate, detailed sound, and other times you're in the mood for something maybe laid back, something warmer, something more euphonic sounding. Is there value potentially in having different chains, not simply, for example, different headphones, but maybe even different speakers or different amps or different preamps or etc., etc.? Have you ever thought about that to satisfy the desire for different sounds?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
Yeah, my comment on that is, okay, look, we don't eat the same food every day. We as humans like different experiences. You know, to do the same thing every single day would be redundant, and it gets redundant in audio as well. When I first started the high-end hobby, I thought that I wanted, you know, to hear the headphones or speakers, whatever, with the purest, most well-measuring. Like, no, I was never a part of ASR, but might as well have been, because I just wanted, you know, transparency. I love to throw around the word transparency. I want my uber transparent headphones on this really transparent DAC and this really transparent, well-measuring amp, and that's how I wanted it. And then as the days went on, I just started thinking, you know, this is starting to feel a bit like stale bread. And for some people, it never reaches that point. I know people that could listen to a Utopia out of like a THX 789 with a topping D90 DAC and be perfectly okay with that, because they're getting a very sort of uncolored, unflavored experience. And I went through a phase where I wanted exactly that, and then I had exactly that, and I got absolutely sick of it, like insanely sick of it. So, I mean, it just wasn't for me. I'm not opposed to having one chain like that, but I couldn't do it full time 24/7. Not for me.
I'll say for
Yeah.
me, the sounds is not so much frequent response or extension, but I think a majority of my enjoyment in sound is actually the transients in, you know, whatever equipment, the transducer, the DAC, you know, the amp, whatever it may be. I think people really underestimate, you know, the softness that they enjoy, or smoothness, or they might really like the sharp attack in a lot of headphones or other transducers. You know, it even applies to phono cartridges, speakers, like etc. amplifiers. You know, people back in the day used to always like rave about slew rate and how that was so important for them, and now we kind of moved away from that, and we think 120 Synad is like the end all be all, but you know, some 0.1% THC I think is fine for 99% of people, and we just try to fool ourselves into thinking that it's not.
What about Bruno? What's your, if you had to describe the sound that you prefer, how would you describe that kind of sound?
As someone who listens to a lot of more unusual, obscure music, I like stuff that sounds warm but yet well balanced. Nothing overly increased. Then again, I don't like. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm probably one of the few people who doesn't really gel very well with HD650s. I'd love them if they just had like a tad less mid-range. Um, and that's kind of me in a weird way. I just like very neutral sounding stuff, which is well balanced. That's me. Tubes are all quite fun for me because they add another stage of colorization, and it's just, you know, neutral but kind of fun at the same time. Again, I'm absolutely terrible at describing soundstage but that's me really.
Yeah, I would say that I also prefer neutrality with a kiss of warmth is how I refer to it. I like things to be pretty neutral. I love treble, I love mid-range, I love low end. I perhaps like the low end to be slightly more prominent, but I've had very bass heavy headphones and I definitely sold them. So yeah, neutrality with just a bit of warmth is how I like it.
I'm really a transient man, I think. I was really resonating with when Gaz was talking about people talking about attack and transient speed. And for me, it's just like having that background and then a sound emerge from where seemingly nowhere and then, leap out at you. That's to try and reproduce that. When you hear that live, you want to try and reproduce it at home. So for me, it's all about transient speed, transient edge, and then also the weight of the transient. So I think dynamics is probably the most important factor for me in sound is that dynamic speed. I even forgive like soundstage. Like I don't really care that much about soundstage as long as the stage is not like actually kind of broken in some way. Like if it's kind of completely compressed or completely diffuse, that's obviously a problem. But if I'm not sitting there, like soundstage is not my priority. And then as far as the actual mid range and the rest of the sound goes, I just kind of want the instruments to sound like the way we'd expect them to sound or the way the artist probably recorded them. But what that means something different to everybody, which is tricky. But yeah, I'd say similar to Lana, just I want it to sound the way it should sound, but I do probably like a little bit of sweetness in the mids, whatever that means, like whether that's a tiny bit of warmth there or just slightly softness, I don't know, because, I don't know, I tried to do the Japanese horn thing with the BLH and the set amps, and it's brutal, and I like that level of brutality, but sometimes you can start to get fatigue as well. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just balancing it all, trying to make sure your brass sounds like brass, but at the same time you don't want to be like in pain every time anything happens.
Yeah, and I like fast transients as well, and my issue has been that sometimes I'll find something that has that, but it'll give the sound sort of an overly emphasized, overly sharpened, artificial nature to it. And that's been my only gripe with it. I would love to find something with incredible like speed and attack and whatnot that sounds more tonally natural, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I recently someone lent me a transformer volume control, and I would say it's probably the most colored preamp I've ever heard in my career in audio, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but I personally hate it. I think it's too soft in the high frequency range, and maybe that's something people want. It kind of makes MP3 sound enjoyable, but to me, it's too much. It's too distracting. I can't unhear it. I personally yanked it out and just I'm not using it, but maybe a lot of people would really like a lower spec transformer volume control, and that might be perfect for them, I think.
Gents and lady, I'm gonna go grab a coffee and some breakfast, but if I come back and y'all still having a chat, and it looks like Connor's trying to join the chat, I don't know if you guys want to try and make this kind of more open and have a few more people join in, because it feels like we've smashed through the topics in literally record time, but I feel like there's still a lot more to talk about, so I'll be back and hopefully people will still be kicking on.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot, Zach.
Yeah, I gotta head out too. Thank you everyone for having me. Really enjoyed talking to y'all and sharing opinions. And
cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, Connor, did you have a comment?
What's good? Do I have a comment? Not really. Just saying what's good. I see Void and Bruno are in here.
How would you describe your sound? What do you look for in sound and audio? What appeals to you?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. I guess it depends on my mood, I would say. I don't really have a go-to sound 100% of the time. Some days I like a brighter leaning sound. Some days just want to relax and don't want murder treble, and some days I like more bass than other days. I guess it just depends. And it's funny because I'm not really a person who uses EQ.
Right. Nick has joined us. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm all right, just making it in. How's everybody today?
Good. How are you?
I am extra blessed.
Oh, good.
How late am I? Ooh.
It's okay. We can keep going. People are kind of coming and going, so it's totally cool. But so Nick, one thing worth talking about here is different types of sound in audio. You have sounds that can be very, very fast and very incisive and very precise and resolving. You have sounds that are much more euphonic, laid back, maybe more 3D, kind of holographic, something in between. How would you describe your sound? What's the sound characteristics that you prefer?
Ooh, that's all depends on what you're listening to. It really, really does. I mean, there's the upbeat hard rock and roll from my youth that I want it fast, hard, and loud. And then there's other times, and I don't really care if it's tube or solid state. I mean, you're just going for the rock and roll feel. Other times I'm listening to a jazz quartet. I want to hear that upright bass and feel it. I got the tubes running, and you can feel the fingers sliding along, and the little pluck. So it really does depend on the type of music you're listening to. And I listen to a wide gamut of music. Matter of fact, I just went to a concert this week and picked up some LPs, just got in from picking up some LPs. Concert was REO, Speedwagon. They're talking about an old band. Their first hit was from '71. So, but and that was too dang loud. The kids they had playing before them just had no idea what decibels were. And they were good when they toned it down some, and they sounded good. But when they were playing, thought they were playing well, they were just playing trash because it was just too loud. No enjoyment for the audience. They were having a good time, but that's not what it's about when you're playing to get paid. It's about the enjoyment of the people in the audience. Anyway, so as far as what I'm looking for, it really depends on the sound, the music I'm listening to, and I don't know how anybody could make any other statement personally, because there's such a wide variety of music, and each one has its best sound set at different parameters. So I don't know what to tell you there. I enjoy some pipe organ music. You got to have the gear to be able to pick up those low tones. If you don't, then you need to go somewhere else where you can enjoy it, because you're just going to be frustrated for the lack of your gear being able to reproduce those sounds and that low bass. So that's all I can give on that. Does anybody have questions about that statement?
I have one question, or kind of I want to just expand upon that and kind of ask you that another part of the question was, whether or not there's value in having multiple chains. So, obviously a lot of people have multiple headphones, and different headphones have different kind of sound characteristics. But what about other components? Like, what about multiple amps, preamps, multiple speakers? Do you think that there's value there? So, for example, let's say you're in the mood for rock and roll and a very fast, incisive, bassy sound. You switch to one chain. Then you are in the mood for kind of soft vocals or something more melodic, and then you switch to another chain. Is that something you see as prudent and practical, or something worth doing? Or do you see that as kind of not worth doing? Because there are some people, like, for example, Uncle Ruckus, his philosophy is, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but, one headphone that does a great job with everything, and he's not interested in multiple headphones or multiple pieces of gear. And I think Zek 2 also pretty much has one main chain for his headphones and for his speakers. So what's your thought on that? Is tuning the sound depending on, you know, the genre, depending on your mood, based on the hardware?
Absolutely. I feel that you're settling. It also comes down to finances. Let's face it, to have multiple chains, you have to be willing and wanting to spend that money. I personally think that yes, I have 3 preamps, 2 different types of amps, and 2 different sets of speakers. So I'd be a liar to tell you I didn't believe in it, because I certainly do. Like I was saying, for the upright bass and jazz and some where you want to get really intimate and be in the room, tubes for sure. I have my tube amps playing with my turntable, or even my DAC playing through my Macintosh 2 preamp. For other types of music, I have my solid state monoblock monsters playing through, you know, the RMC1 solid state processor, or I can use those solid states through my 2 preamp. It depends on the specific music I'm listening to at that time. So yes, to me, I have a switch custom built to be able to select between the 3 preamps, the 2 amps, and the 2 processors or preamps. I mean speakers. So most definitely, back to it depends on what you're listening to and what you want to emphasize, or what's most important to you about the type of music you're listening to.
Void, can you comment on the type of sound that you like, and also the value of multiple chains? Is that something that you like?
When it comes to sound, if there's like a constant thing that I like is I like big soundstage, and I've always liked big soundstage. The first system that I heard that I would say was hi-fi was a pair of Bozak Concert Grands, which are the size of a refrigerator. And the soundstage those things through just kind of completely changed my perspective when I think I was like 17 or 18 years old. And that's kind of carried over nowadays. You know, I really like Magnepans and planar magnetics for that very reason. But I like more of a rolled off sound. I'm pretty treble sensitive, and I listen to a lot of electronic music. A lot of it's really compressed, and because of that, I find that when I listen to that kind of music on very accurate or revealing equipment, it's really not that enjoyable of an experience. When I listen to music that's more well recorded and has more of a sense of space and has dynamics, it sounds fantastic on systems like that. And as for the utility of multiple systems, I guess it's like a practicality thing. It's like what Nick said. It's like what you're able to do with your current living circumstances, because not everyone can have like a bunch of different equipment and a bunch of different chains. And if you're really into speakers, that's where things get even more complicated, is having a bunch of different speakers in a given room, or multiple different rooms with multiple different systems. It gets pretty complicated. I personally just have a couple pairs of headphones, and I'm pretty content with that. But you know, I'm not the average, so yeah, that's where I sit when it comes to that stuff.
All right, cool. I think we're kind of winding down now on the episode. So before we close it out, why don't we go around the room and everybody, if you could give one album recommendation, I'd appreciate that. So Lana, do you want to start?
Skip me for now. Let me think. I want to recommend something really nice.
Sure. Anybody else?
Just off the
Yeah,
top.
I can recommend one in just a second.
It comes down to what type of music you want to hear. Norah Jones, "Come Fly Away." I mean, I think everybody's heard that. Let's see. I just picked up the Best of the Grateful Dead from 77 to 89. So I can't really comment on it, but it's what I picked up today. So I guess that's a pretty strong recommendation if I spent good money on it. And who else?
Can't go wrong with can't go wrong with anything from the 90s that is overly compressed and is around the lines of LGJ Buckham. I've currently been listening to quite a lot of techno music, so Surgeon stuff. If you don't like if you don't like, if you love, if you love repetitive music, and you want the snare just to be coming in a good 3 minutes to a track, techno is for you. It's really repetitive, and I weirdly find it enjoyable.
Year of No Lights Osterwelt is a great soundstage test, and it's honestly just an excellent album, period.
All right. Any other? Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to recommend Liberty by Annette Ashvik.
Oh yeah.
I found her when I was on Tidal, and apparently I had a bunch of music that was similar to her stuff. So Tidal just started playing all her stuff, and I was like, wow. And Liberty is one of my test tracks. Like, ooh, it has nice vocals, and then the instrumentation, like when that saxophone comes in, and oh my gosh, like sounds great on any good system.
Nice. Yeah, if I'm kind of more in the kind of vocal, kind of jazz kind of mood lately, especially with my crack amp. So I would recommend this album by Haley Lauren called Heart First. So yeah, it's really good, really nice vocal, kind of soft vocal female jazz album. So that's something to check out. Anybody else?
Yeah, Harry Manx live at the Glengood Studio. Great album, really, really good. It's it's blues mixed with like all sorts of like different world type music. It's really nice.
Awesome. Okay, so sounds good. So yeah, I think we're all set. Any final words before we close it out? Oh, Tyler. Well, hold on. One second. Hold on. Tyler just came in. Let's extend it a bit here, because Tyler came in. Tyler, let's see if he comes on, because he could talk about the ZMFs a bit maybe. And
the man of few words.
Yeah. Hold on. Let's extend it. It's definitely worth extending for Tyler. Let's see if he can come on though. Yeah. While we're waiting for Tyler, any other thoughts? Anything else you guys wanted to discuss or you wanted to mention?
Anyone had any significant changes in audio around silver cables versus copper? I'm genuinely curious what the experiences of people here have been.
Okay, there's a few things you don't talk about publicly, and cables is one of them.
Yeah, like Fight Club.
That and capacitors. Those two you really can't speak publicly about without being
What at risk, though?
hung by your feet.
Like carbon composition versus metal film, like Alan Bradley. I mean, there's obvious difference in audibility.
Although this is Sonic Visions, who am I kidding?
You're a funny guy. Very funny.
No, anything else to add? I don't know. On the case of multiple systems, I believe that having a reference that you can always come back to, I think that's important. But I also think, broadening your horizons and listening to the different gear on a somewhat regular basis, that should be important if you want to stay up to date on certain things, definitely. But I definitely believe in having for sure.
Tyler, are you there? I think his mic is muted. You just gotta unmute Tyler. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, there he goes. Yeah, Tyler. Hey, how's it going?
That's today. Long day of was not ready for the social media outpouring after
the posting of pictures and video.
So you heard the new ZMF headphones, and I don't know, maybe some people haven't seen your video. I did mention it earlier in the podcast, but do you want to give us kind of any updated thoughts? How are you liking the new headphones, the Atrium?
I'd say for kind of update from the video is that listening to them more and more, the more they become something I want to listen. Like I tend to reach for them over the VOs, like generally, and that could just be new shiny kind of factor. I've had them for about just shy of 2 weeks now, but I would say overall they're definitely a more neutral sounding. They're not as warm as ZMFs I've heard before, or have a warm might not be the right word, a flavor to them. Like the ZMF flavor is, it's still there. It's just like what Zach mentions in his talk about it, that ZMF neutral, and without hearing them, it's hard to describe that, but it is that they have this neutral tendency to them, and they're just, the mid-range is probably the thing that they're going to be probably most known for. I'd say the mid-range and the stage is probably the two biggest, and then I think the surpriser that a lot of people won't be ready for is that the low end on them is it's got this almost sub-bass quality to it, where actually, like I wasn't joking when I said, when I had, like, there's been a couple times where I've been listening to them and I thought my Kefs with my subwoofer were on, like taking the headphones off and go, wait, oh,
Nice.
nope. Yeah, so that was a big, nice kind of experience with them. I don't think they're going to be for everybody. That's just the nature of headphones. But I think a lot of people are going to really gravitate towards them, though, at the end of the day.
And one question we kind of just went around the room with is kind of people describing what their ideal sound is. You know, there's, you know, very, very fast and incisive dynamic sounds, and there's kind of more laid back and smooth and holographic, and you know, there's a whole spectrum of sound. If you had to describe a sound that kind of defines your preference, what would that sound be?
I think for me, I generally tend to go for the more laid back, holographic, kind of get lost in the music kind of thing. Like I like to be transported to the music, if that makes sense, right? Like I want to be, I'm there for the music, not necessarily for the gear. So the more the gear can transport me into that mindset, the happier I tend to be. But I do tend to be more of a lean back and relaxed kind of listener, if that makes sense. But I do enjoy a good, you know, energetic pair of headphones on occasion. But yeah, I generally tend to have more of that laid back kind of preference.
Now everybody knows that you have multiple headphones and multiple sets of headphones. As you mentioned, you know, you sometimes want a more energetic sound, and you might reach for a different headphone. But do you think that there's value of also kind of swapping gear and swapping chains? So, for example, different amps, different preamps, maybe different DACs. Is that something that you think is worth doing, and is something you do when you listen to audio?
So that's actually a really, really good question, because I think I'm also a big fan of experience, right? Like, and by experience, I mean experiencing new things to find out if it's something worth your while, right? And so I do believe in having multiple amps and DACs and chains and trying to figure out a nice synergy between them and what have you. But at the same time, I can understand that that's a very expensive proposition for a lot of people. And so I also think that if you're going to do something like that, I think that for me personally, I do like to swap out my gear and change up the chains every so often. But for, I guess, less enthusiastic audiophiles, or the people that have maybe are on a budget, I would say focus on the headphones or the transducer first, then the amp, and then the DAC. In fact, I mentioned it in something recently. I was chatting with somebody, or in a video, I think I talked about it. But to me, I think that the thing that you should probably spend a decent amount of money on, but then forget about for a long time, would be the DAC, if that makes sense. Like, I think get yourself a budget that's, you know, in a certain realm, max it out for whatever you can,
get the DAC within that budget, and then just forget about it for a couple of years until
Right.
there's new technology or something, because that's going
Yeah.
to be the thing that's for most people, that's going to be the thing that's not going to be the most transparent or most obvious change in your chain, audio chain, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I feel that Reddit has a completely different opinion, and so do other forums on the internet. But, like, let me tell you, I tried some really good amps, both in-home and at HeadFi meets, and I would bring, like, I have a Bricasti now, as most of you know, but before, like, I would bring my cheap peasant DAC and stick it behind a fantastic amp, and you could tell that the DAC was such a weak link in the chain. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, DACs only make like 5% of the difference. Obviously, the headphone and or the headphone or the speakers and the amp make the most difference. But I don't know, for me, getting a really solid DAC, it just sort of, like, putting anything else behind a really good chain, it really just, the DAC feels almost like it's like a filter, and you get this clean, pure, filtered sort of like water when you have a really good DAC, and that just, everything else has a solid foundation. I see the DAC as a foundation to stand on. So if you have an amazing headphone or set of speakers, an amazing amplifier, but you stick like a subpar DAC in the chain, I think it's on a shaky foundation, at least in my experience.
I agree with that. That's very, very valid in my opinion.
I'm just going to go through some of the questions that we've talked about, and feel free for anybody to chime in. But Tyler, do you use EQ much? And if you do, what are the downsides of EQ?
I'm not a big EQ person. I see the value in it for some people, but personally, I don't. Every time I've used EQ, I've always found that for everything that I boosted, there was a negative. Like there's never a free lunch, if that makes sense. So like if I boosted the treble, then something else in the frequency range would take a hit, or the whole thing would take a hit as far as like sound quality or what have you. I've never really heard an EQ profile that made me want to bother with maintaining an EQ profile, if that makes sense. And then for me, as far as EQ on the fly, it's just such a time-consuming thing, because every time a new song would come on, or let's say I listen to such a varied music kind of list or playlist, that every time like even changing bit rate to whatnot would change the quality of the track, which then in turn would change the EQ profile. And so it was just never worth the effort and time, when at the end of the day, I just want to sit back and relax and listen to music, So for me, I found EQ is a great tool, and I think it's a free tool. So everyone should definitely play around with it and find out if it's worth your while. But for me personally, I'd rather just get the headphones I like and their signature I like, and not have to worry about it.
You, Tyler, were at CanJam, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, New York City's most recent one. Yeah.
What? So I think you, out of all of us, because one of our topics was kind of thoughts from CanJam. We had Micaiah often joins us. He's representing Rawl, Headamp, not Rawl, Headamp. But he's not around. You're the only one in our group right now that's been to CanJam. Do you mind sharing some thoughts about CanJam? How did it go? What did you like there? And maybe we can also get into kind of discussion about whether, in the future, is that, are we going to keep having CanJams? Is there value of having these types of meets? Are smaller meets better than these big, potentially more expensive meets? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I'll tackle the last questions first. I think there's going to be a place for the big ones like this CanJam. I think for sure is still value, just because it's a way to showcase companies' products in a more controlled environment. Granted, it's still noisy and it's not the best, but at the end of the day, it's still a good way to showcase your products and also just meet other people in the industry, and or for the community members, a great way to meet fellow community members and what have you. And it's just a kind of a fun time in that regard. So I don't think there's going to be a time when that doesn't happen. but I could see it maybe lessening here and there, depending on how, you know, the world goes and what have you. But and as far as the smaller meets, I think those are even more valuable for the community, because then you get to try things that you maybe wouldn't have before, and you get out of your comfort zone in the sense of what you like to listen to, because a lot of people have very dedicated chains, and so to be able to take that headphone to another place, or that dedicated chain to another place, and maybe swap components and see what that does is very kind of eye-opening, I guess, to some level for some people, and it's a really cool experience. And then, like I said, meeting fellow enthusiasts and audiophiles and being able to discuss the chains and or your gear and, you know, exchange music and what have you is always a huge benefit, I think, and just a cool experience. As far as CanJam itself, my experience there was pretty interesting. I've gone to the CanJam SoCal one, which I felt the SoCal one was seen more for the community and less. I mean, it still had the industry piece, but then it did seem more community focused for whatever reason. And then the New York City one was more. It felt more industry, if that makes sense. It felt more like a trade show than a meetup, if that makes sense. And that could have also been because I was there helping with the booth, but that's kind of how I felt about that one. But as far as things I was excited for, wasn't too many things there. The LCD5 was pretty interesting to me, but it wasn't really my thing. As far as headphones, the surpriser for me was the Stealth, Dan Clark Audio Stealth with tube amps. I was really surprised at how much I liked that combo. Whereas the Stealth by itself isn't exactly my favorite thing, but with a good tube amp, I was actually impressed with how that one played out. Really, outside of those things, the Mez stuff was interesting. But I think at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway for me, and favorite part about it, was just actually chatting with the community members and industry people. Like I got to hang out with Alex Rosin from Rad Zeros, and we had a long discussion, which was awesome. And I have a pair of his headphones that I got to take home with me to check out for a demo. But other than that, it was really that's probably my favorite takeaway, was actually the community part and chatting with people. That's always my favorite part of those things.
Cool, that's awesome. Okay, well, I mean, I really appreciate you coming on, and you know, if for people who don't know, Tyler's Eclectic is your YouTube channel, and definitely check out that channel. It's great. You're doing great reviews and impressions there, and I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else you want to say, Tyler, or anybody else? Any final words before we kind of close it out?
I'll leave it to you guys. Thanks for having me jump on last minute. Sorry for the delay.
No, not at all. Zach, any thoughts? I think Zach came back.
Oh yeah, I came back, but I just heard the tail end of what Tyler was saying about CanJam and the different meets he'd been to, so that was cool to hear. Especially, I get the community thing. It's good when it's about the community and about sort of sharing experiences and meeting people. That's like 50% of the reason I'm in the hobby these days.
Exactly, yeah, same.
So next week we're actually going to have a special episode where we're going to try to get a lot of the tech and engineer guys on and talk DIY and talk about that aspect of audio. So that will be again on Friday, 5:30 p.m. EST. So definitely tune in to that episode. And yeah, and hopefully we can have you guys all back. Thanks a lot, appreciate it, and until next time.
Thanks, man.
Until next time.
Thank y'all.
Cheers.
Thanks, mate. See ya.
Thanks.